Former President Muhammadu Buhari has been laid to rest in his compound in Daura in Katsina State. President Tinubu was there to personally receive his remains. The former head of state, who was both a military ruler and a civilian president, died at a clinic in London on Sunday at the age of 82. And we will look back at today's funeral ceremony. Amid full military and civilian honors, Nigerians from all walks of life have been saying goodbye to their former leader, pledging to perpetuate the ideals he stood for. So many of them, of course, speaking of the void that his absence will leave behind. He was a soldier, a military ruler, and later a democratically elected president, a man who rose through the army ranks in the 60s, led Nigeria after a military coup in the 80s, and returned in 2015 as the first opposition candidate to defeat a sitting president, praised for his anti-corruption stance, but criticized over insecurity, police brutality, and a struggling economy. For many, he leaves behind a mixed legacy, even as millions convey their condolences to his family. And I mean, we just saw throngs of crowds all around that compound, people climbing trees to try and get a better view of the man they so admired, particularly people in his hometown of Daura there. But there were issues that he was criticized about, including insecurity, police brutality, a struggling economy. For many, he leaves behind that mixed legacy. But for all, he played his part, and as his soul goes into repose and he's laid to rest in that simple grave in his compound in Daura, you could say that his life has been a record of all the trials and tribulations of this country, from colonialism to a civil war, from military coups to democracy. But particularly, history will judge how well he spent the 8 years of this country as a democratically elected president. We will look back at his life, the impact he had, and the contradictions he brought to his leadership. And with me in the studio is Arise analyst Mahmood Jega. Mahmood, thank you very much indeed for coming in.
Thank you.
How do you think, in the broadest sense possible, that President Buhari will be remembered by Nigerians?
As you were saying a minute ago, it was some kind of mixed legacy, but then that was inevitable for someone who was in the public eye for so long. He was a governor of a huge state, northeastern state, which is now 6 states in one. He was a minister, for that matter, of petroleum. He was GOC of several army divisions. Then he was a military head of state. And then he later on was civilian president. In between, he was chairman of the Petroleum Special Trust Fund. And before he became president, he was also deeply involved as the leader of the opposition. So it's a very long career in the public eye. And inevitably, there will be ups and downs and goods and bads. But on the whole, I think he will be best remembered as a leader who made anti-corruption his single most memorable goal. And to his eternal credit, all these offices that he held, he was never personally accused of corruption, even after he left office for the last time. There were accusations that some of the people around him did this or that, and maybe he was unable to control all of them, especially because in his later years, there was advanced age and also relatively poor health because he was in and out of hospital. But the fact that he himself, when he was overthrown as a military ruler in 1985 and was in detention for 3 years, the only accusations his successors were making was that human rights were abused under his rule. He detained hundreds of politicians and public officers, and there were these special military tribunals he instituted that handed down sometimes 100 years jail sentences.
And he took people out who'd already been found guilty.
Yeah.
And took them out who they found guilty of drugs crimes.
Yeah.
He went and
shot them,
brought them out,
yeah,
having already been tried and found guilty and sent to prison. He decided that they should be shot, and he took them out to the beach and
that
shot
was them. One of the most controversial elements. You see, he and his deputy, Major General Tunde Idiabo, they churned out a lot of draconian laws, which, as the lawyer said that time, it's okay to make a draconian law, but don't backdate it, and that was the biggest problem.
And that's what they did.
That's what they did. In
Yeah.
the case of the drug pushers, one of them had been caught before the decree was enacted. So the lawyers, the Bar Association that time said, look, those ones that were arrested after the decree, you can go ahead because they knew there was this law, but they did it. But the one, drug trafficking was always an offense, even before you came in. And there was a penalty. It was not death, but there was a penalty. So this particular one, if I remember his name well, Lawal Akani Ojulope, they said punish him under the previous laws. Then the other two, Bartholomew Owo and Bernard Ogedengbe, they said those ones, you can go ahead because they committed. He said no. And as we had subsequently, even in the Supreme Military Council, which was required to confirm the sentences, the majority said, let's do what the lawyers are saying. But Diabon and himself said, no, you have to.
But it's very interesting you say that, because I interviewed Buhari just before he became president, and I asked him that specific question. And he said to me the absolute converse of what you're saying now. What he said was that the majority, that he couldn't make a decision on his own, that there was a Supreme Military Council, and that they made the decision. You know, the majority decided that those people should be taken out and shot, so that it wasn't him who made the kind of the singular decision to take them out and shoot them. But of course, you know,
we may never know.
Sure. Yeah, that's the thing.
Since he's not there now, but you know, when he was in detention, his successors, who are his colleagues in the Supreme Military Council, they said, and it was reported in the newspapers at that time, that 20 out of the 22 members of the Supreme Military Council said, let's not execute at least the one who was arrested before the law. And they said that with the help of the then Attorney General, Chike Ofodile,
yes,
they now took a look at the decree and said, actually, the power to confirm the sentence is with the head of state, not with the Supreme Military Council. Right. That was what we had.
So the buck stopped on his desk.
That was what we at least read from his. But on the whole, the decrees were very draconian, but most of them were for a good purpose. For example, vandalization of public utilities. Anybody who vandalized NEPA, transformers or NITEL cables, you know, they made it a capital offense. Then examination malpractice was given, I think, 20 years jail sentence. But of course, on the other hand, they had this controversial law, the Public Officers Protection Against False Accusations Decree number 4 of 1984, under which two newspaper editors, Nduka Irabo and Tunde Thompson, were arrested. And the story for which they were arrested was about, they got a leak about some ambassadors that were going to be posted. And it turned out to be true. But the Attorney General who prosecuted them said the law says any publication that is false in any material particular and or embarrassing to the federal military government will be punished. They said, but it is true. They said, yes, even if it is true, if it is embarrassing to the federal
Oh my goodness.
Very
I think the word you used, draconian, is very appropriate. But we're looking at pictures now. That's obviously a gun salute. That is taking place at that funeral. And you know a thing or two about these things, Mahmood. This was an Islamic burial ceremony. Just take us through what would have happened here, because we saw him brought in, and then he was draped in the Nigerian flag, and then just before he was laid to rest, they removed the flag, and he was just left with a sort of white shroud over him, and before he was laid to rest. But obviously there were prayers and so on. Just talk us through what would have happened.
The Muslim funeral, the procedures are very well established in the Sharia. Number one, it has to be immediate. This one took 2 days because he died abroad.
Yeah.
If he had died here in Nigeria, he would have been buried on that same day, because I think he died around 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
Right.
There was enough time to bury him that very day, but this one because he had to be brought from abroad. Okay, then there is the pomp and ceremony, and also the very large gathering of VIPs because he was a former president.
And exceptions are made for things like that.
Well, the essential things have to be done, which is that there will be the funeral prayer, which lasts about 2 or 3 minutes, and then the grave will be dug. Then his remains will be brought and lowered into the grave. There is a way in which the grave is dug, and the remains will be laid on the right side, on the facing.
So it's laid
the
on the
east.
side.
On the side,
Right.
the right side, facing the east. That is the Kaaba. So then they will bring the sticks and put it, and normally it is family members and the closest friends who will be assisted to lay those sticks and then bring the wet earth and put on top, and then bring the dry earth and put there. Then after that, the imams will do a short sermon,
Right.
usually drawing attention of people to the finality of death, that you see this is the last and this and that, therefore we should all remember this as we live our lives. Then family members...
In other words, dust thou art, and
Exactly.
unto dust thou shalt return.
That is it. That is it. Then the family members, children and others, and usually it is an all-male affair. But after the crowd has dispersed, maybe the day or so after, the female family members may also come to the graveside and offer some prayers. Really, that is it. The other things we have seen, like the guard of honor, like the draping,
Those are all military.
Those are military
And
things.
because he was
State.
obviously a head of state.
It was a state funeral, so you can't prevent those. But otherwise, those are the simple, essential ones, and those were done in this.
Yes.
This
Well, thank you for putting us through that. And of course, you were talking earlier about the fact that he was a former military ruler. You took us through some of the things that occurred during his military period. I mean, just 18 months, but it seemed like a lot longer, didn't it?
like a lifetime.
Yeah, and then he came out, he went to prison, he was brought out, and eventually he transitioned into a Democrat. And, became a politician, essentially, even though, from everything I've been told, he didn't like traditional politicians, certainly traditional Nigerian politicians, very much, because he associated a lot of them with corruption and all kinds of underhanded things. But nevertheless, he became a politician and presided over the affairs of this country as a democratically elected president for 8 years. What do you think his death will mean for politics in Nigeria today?
Okay, as you said, his transition must have been personally very traumatizing. because he was thoroughly military in his personal inclination.
That is his transition to democracy.
To democratic president. And it was clear from his general attitude that he didn't like politicians and didn't trust them. And they also didn't like
They
him.
didn't trust him.
They didn't trust
He wasn't
him.
one of them.
He wasn't. And really, when he entered politics in 2002, he quickly gathered this huge cult-like image in the north. And you could see that it was all poor people, and all the things the slogans that they were shouting, Mai gaskiya, which means the truthful one, and maganin kwari, that means the insecticide that kills
kills the bugs.
Now, they really meant the big politicians and the big public officers who they saw as corrupt, and that this is the man who is coming to deal with them. Which was why, as we reported that time, when he was making all that effort, people were saying the whole North was behind him. But we could see that the main northern politicians, the traditional rulers,
they were wary.
They were wary of him, honestly, because essentially he was thought to be coming to deal with them.
Yes.
And when he became civilian president, it was also clear that it was totally different from his days as military ruler. This time is not decree. You have to draft a law and send to National Assembly, and then back and forth. And many concessions have to be made, budget padding, this and that. So, but he was very conscious. Especially the newspapers used to call him former military dictator. And he didn't seem to like that. And he didn't want to do things that people would say, yes.
Yes, I see what you mean. He wanted to dissociate himself. Nevertheless, I mean, this is the president of a country where a president has so many powers and so much, capacity to make a change. I mean, if you look at Donald Trump in America, for example, a lot of what he's been, I mean, Nigeria was modeled after the United States in terms of the powers of the presidency and so on and so forth. So he could have ruled through executive orders and so on. I mean, he had the democratic option. You see what I mean? The constitutional right to rule through executive orders, which could have made things move very quickly, couldn't it? I mean, he could have put through a lot of things, and that would have not necessarily made him undemocratic.
Well, as you said, President Trump, who tries that option of, I think he reeled out hundreds of executive orders. Many of them were stymied in the
some of them were, but quite a few got through.
Well, in Nigeria, we do not have a very good tradition of executive orders. Even though under the Buhari presidency, some were enacted, like I remember the ease of doing business, things which Vice President Osibanjo was chairing, was essentially an executive order, not a law. And it made things like visa on arrival. And I think those ones are within the executive powers of the president. But we all remember, when President Buhari came as civilian president in 2015, he was very, very slow and deliberate in taking action, even in constituting his cabinet and making key appointments like secretary to the government and national security advisor, which was why at that time people even began to call him Baba Go Slow. At that time he was quite slow and deliberate, and then he was calling. I think it was because his attitude was that the whole thing was a sham, the civil service, the politics, everything. So he took a lot of time calling ministries one by one for briefing and all that before he now began to constitute his government and act. So he had a committee, I remember, a very large one, that produced a report for him. Apparently, they didn't recommend this option of executive orders. Now, instead, he now went through the National Assembly, got some things, didn't get some things, and the National Assembly also imposed some things on him. For example, some changes in the Electoral Act, like the one that prevented his ministers from becoming delegates in their own parties' conventions and contesting for elections. It was not his idea. It was the National Assembly that brought that, and his Attorney General and himself even went to court and tried to get the court to quash that particular, and he refused to sign the law as passed by the National Assembly, and they overruled him with a 2/3 majority. So I think he fairly well conformed with some of the democratic traditions, and there wasn't a widespread human rights abuses as were feared. You know, some of the things that happen is not because of president or anything, like the police detention cells.
Or the NSAS protests.
Okay,
I mean,
then
he didn't order the police to go out there and shoot people.
Well, terrible things happen, but you know, the NSAS protesters also didn't help matters because it degenerated into a riot. In Lagos in particular, whole stores were looted, the Oba's palace was looted. Now, in that kind of situation, it is the responsibility of the police and ultimately even the military to restore order.
But you see, looking at those pictures now, I mean, that's why I was asking that question about what you think his death is going to mean for politics in Nigeria. Because, I mean, you could see from those pictures was taken just a few months ago.
Yeah.
You had this pilgrimage. Yeah. I mean, people who were preparing for 2027 politics in Nigeria, the election and so on, coming to him essentially to get his blessing.
I agree with you.
Yeah, I mean, so he had become an important figure, but whether or not he was an important figure, because a lot of the people there are opposition figures.
Yeah. Okay.
So whether he had become sort of an opposition icon, you see what I mean? Which is what he's always been in Nigerian political history.
Yeah, but it was...
It's another question altogether, isn't it?
It's not only opposition figures. I remember the then APC
Well, the APC
chairman,
led a delegation as well.
Of governors and all that. So and they also went. You see, Nigerian politicians are fond of this tradition. General Babangida, for example, has been in retirement in Minna for more than 30 years now. But you still find people going to his house. You see everybody who is campaigning for president or any senior position in Nigeria still goes to pay homage to him. It's a good photo op, and then you are able to say some things which will get reported. Now, Buhari was moving in the same direction. His house was becoming, especially after he moved back to Kaduna, it was becoming a mecca of sorts. People were going. But more than that, he still had a fairly big following of people who were prominent in his administration. After all, this was a president who was reluctant to make changes to his cabinet and inner circle. Most of his ministers served for the whole 8 years.
Indeed.
And even military service chiefs served for 5 years. You know, he was reluctant to change. So he has all these people, and almost all of them were and are members of the ruling APC. So I am sure, and you know, he kept saying up to the end of his life that he remains grateful to APC and will never betray it. So when I think about it, his death is a loss probably to the Tinubu presidency, because probably they will think that all these former Buhari people, CPC people who are trying to desert APC, maybe in the final analysis, General Buhari himself may be able to call them. But now he's not there, so everybody...
But of course, at the same time, Buhari always said that, although he was speaking generally about the Nigerian people, but he always said that he belonged to everybody and nobody. And therefore, it almost seemed as if he wanted to make a pointed, wanted to be pointed about that fact, in the sense that he didn't want to be associated as which has become a sort of tradition with a lot of former presidents in Nigeria. They don't become partisan. You see what I mean? They don't sort of go around saying, well, I'm PDP or I'm this or that or whatever.
Yeah.
And maybe he wanted to make that same point, that he no longer, as a statesman, belonged exclusively to the APC.
No, but actually, he made that statement in his inaugural speech. It was on the day he was being inaugurated in 2015.
Yes, I remember that. But in terms of the practice, that would have happened after he left office.
Personally, as I reported during his presidency, I think that phrase was put in by the speech writers, and I don't think he reflected very much on the meaning, honestly, because I didn't see. He was quickly accused of being held captive by a cabal. You know, it was under his presidency that the media was saying all that there was a cabal.
Yes.
Now, for a man who was supposed to belong to nobody, there shouldn't have been a small group of people that powerful around him, but those accusations were made. And he also said he belonged to everybody. Well, that part, I think his career showed that he has a genuine concern for the ordinary person. Although, you know, in the end, when you get into power, you find that there are certain things that there will be push and pull, in short. What the economic advisors are saying, the ordinary people don't want that. Like, for example, removing fuel subsidy. It is clear that he struggled with that. He got the PIB bill, the Petroleum Industry Reform Bill, and that one clearly advocated removing subsidy. But he didn't want to do that. He increased fuel prices slightly in 2016. He was lucky that there was no riot, because Labour tried to mobilize for a riot, but that time he was still somewhat in a honeymoon period, and people thought, no, this man, he's such a good man. If he says we should increase fuel prices slightly, there must be a good reason, so there is no need to riot. But he didn't want to push his luck very far. Then there are other things that he clearly did reluctantly, like some devaluation of the naira. You know, the problem he had in his early months, the money accruing to the Federation account reduced drastically, and the state governments all came to him and complained that they were unable to pay salaries. What is the solution? He gave them some loans. It didn't work, because within a month or two they finished that. Then they said there was this money from the Paris Club refund. He paid that.
I remember that.
Again, it didn't work. So, as we reported that time, it was the governor of the central bank who said, Mr. President, the dollars accruing to the Federation account have dwindled. But you know what? If we devalue the naira, then there will be more naira to distribute to the states. They will be able to pay salaries. Of course, it will cause inflation, but at least a worker will get his salary. Don't mind that if you go to the market, he cannot buy anything, but it is worse if he says he was not paid his salary. So let's get more naira.
Yeah, that's a bigger stain on your reputation.
That is true. He gives them the salary. If they can't buy anything, that's a different problem. So he very reluctantly agreed that time to some devaluation of the naira. He must have done it with the utmost reluctance, because during his campaign period, he used to say all these IMF things, where did they work? Show me one country where devaluation worked. Show me one country where removal of subsidy worked. You know, he was saying that on the rostrum, but he had to do some of it, some.
Indeed.
Yes.
Mahmood, I want to thank you very much indeed. Mahmood Jega is a Rise News analyst and former chairman of the editorial board of Daily Trust newspaper, and he's been bringing us up to date. And the story, of course, top of the list today, Nigeria's former president, Muhammadu Buhari, has been laid to rest in his compound in Daura in Katsina State. President Tinubu was there to personally receive his remains. The former head of state, who was both a military ruler and a civilian president, died at a clinic in London on Sunday at the age of 82, and we've been looking back at his life and at today's funeral ceremony.